Zeigarnik effect. It is a psychological quirk where your brain fixates on unfinished tasks and easily forgets the ones you have already done. Back in the 1920s, a psychologist named Bluma Zeigarnik was sitting in a busy Berlin cafe. She noticed something odd about the waiters. They could remember huge, complicated orders perfectly without writing them down. But the second a customer paid their bill, the waiter forgot everything about the order. Zeigarnik went back to the lab and tested this. She found that when you start a task, your brain creates a sort of mental tension. It acts like a biological sticky note telling you to keep the job front and center in your mind. When you get interrupted or leave something half done, that tension stays active. It creates a constant mental itch. You find yourself lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about an email you left sitting in your drafts folder. This still matters today because it explains why we binge-watch shows with cliffhangers, and it shows exactly why putting off your work makes you feel so anxious. Semmelweis reflects. This is our tendency to completely reject new information just because it contradicts what we already believe. It gets its name from a Hungarian doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis. Back in 1847 at the Vienna General Hospital, he noticed women dying in maternity wards at alarming rates. He realized doctors were bringing invisible decaying matter from the autopsy room straight to the delivery room. His solution was simple. He told the doctors to wash their hands with a chlorine solution. Mortality rates dropped almost immediately to under 1%. Instead of celebrating, the established medical community mocked him. The doctors felt insulted by the idea that their hands were unclean. They ignored his hard data and forced him out of his job. The visible effect of this reflex is that groundbreaking, life-saving discoveries are often laughed at or buried for decades before society finally accepts them. This still matters today because human nature has not changed, and we still have to fight our own stubbornness to accept new truths. IKEA effect. The IKEA effect is a mental blind spot where you overvalue things you helped create. In 2011, researchers Michael Norton, Daniel Moschon, and Dan Ariely named this quirk after the famous Swedish furniture company. They ran experiments where people folded origami, built Lego sets, and assembled plain storage boxes. The researchers found that the simple act of putting effort into a project changes how your brain views it. When you spend an hour wrestling with an Allen wrench and confusing diagrams to build a wobbly coffee table, you invest your own energy into the wood and screws. Because of this sweat equity, you end up loving that crooked table way more than a perfectly built one you could buy fully assembled at a store. You see your hard work, so you overlook the obvious flaws. This bias still matters today because brands constantly use it to build customer loyalty. Whenever you customize sneakers online or cook a subscription meal kit, you happily pay a premium to do the work yourself. Diderot effect. The Diderot effect is a behavioral quirk where buying one new thing triggers a spiral of endless shopping. It happens because we want our possessions to match each other. The concept goes back to 1769 when a French philosopher named Denis Diderot received a beautiful scarlet dressing gown. Before this, his study was filled with worn-out, mismatched stuff that he liked just fine. But once he put on that fancy new robe, his old desk suddenly looked shabby. So he bought a new desk. Then his chairs looked wrong, so he replaced those too. Eventually, he replaced his rug and his bookshelves, plunging himself into debt just to make his room match the robe. You see this happen all the time today. You buy a nice new couch, and suddenly your old living room rug looks terrible. You buy a new rug, which makes your coffee table look cheap. It still matters today because recognizing this psychological chain reaction helps you stop buying things you do not actually need. Spotlight effect. The spotlight effect is a mental trap where you believe everyone is closely watching your every move, flaw, and mistake. It was officially named in the year 2000 by psychologist Thomas Gilovich. He proved it by having college students walk into a crowded room wearing an embarrassing Barry Manilow t-shirt. The students felt a massive imaginary spotlight on them and assumed half the room was staring. In reality, only about 20% of the people even noticed the shirt. Your brain naturally puts you at the center of your own universe. This makes you hyper-aware of a bad haircut, a tiny coffee stain on your collar, or a clumsy trip on the sidewalk. You instantly assume everyone around you saw it too, but the visible reality is quite different. Everyone else is the main character of their own story, entirely consumed by their own internal worries and insecurities. Understanding this fact still matters today because it frees you to stop stressing over minor embarrassments and just live your life. Ringelmann effect. This is the tendency for individual productivity to drop as the size of a group gets bigger. It is also known as social loafing. Back in 1913, a French agricultural engineer named Maximilien Ringelmann wanted to see how efficiently groups worked together. He asked participants to pull on a rope and measured how much force they used. When someone pulled alone, they gave it their all. But when he added more people to the rope, the effort per person actually went down. People naturally started to relax. In a crowd, your brain realizes that your personal effort is less noticeable, so you stop trying as hard. You assume the rest of the group will pick up the slack. You see this visible effect all the time when a team grows too large and individual output shrinks. It is the exact reason why group projects at school or big corporate teams often feel frustrating. It still matters today because it forces managers to keep teams small and hold everyone personally accountable. Focusing illusion. The focusing illusion is a mental blind spot that happens when you place too much importance on just one piece of information while ignoring everything else. When you imagine a future event, your brain gets stuck on a single standout detail. In 1998, psychologist Daniel Kahneman studied this by asking people if they thought Californians were happier than Midwesterners. Most people said yes, assuming the sunny weather made life better. But the actual happiness levels between the two groups were exactly the same. The people making the prediction only focused on the sunshine. They completely forgot about everyday realities like traffic, paying bills, and relationship issues. This causes a massive error in how you predict your own future happiness. You might convince yourself that getting a higher salary will suddenly fix all your bad days. Once you get that money, you quickly realize your daily frustrations are still there. It still matters today because understanding this glitch helps you make better life choices instead of chasing one magical fix. Psychological reactance. It is that intense knee-jerk feeling you get when someone tells you what to do and you immediately want to do the exact opposite. Psychologist Jack Brem first gave a name to this behavior back in 1966. He figured out that when humans feel their behavioral freedom is being threatened or taken away, an alarm goes off in their brains. The main cause is a perceived loss of control. If a boss or a new law says you absolutely cannot do something, you suddenly feel an overwhelming urge to do it. You might even adopt a totally contrary opinion just to prove you still make your own choices. You dig your heels in and push back. The visible effect is blatant rebellion or stubbornness, even if the rule was actually meant to keep you safe. This matters today because it explains why heavy-handed public health campaigns or strict company policies often completely backfire, reminding us that people always need to feel like they are in the driver's seat. Frequency illusion. Also known as the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, this is the feeling you get when you learn something new and suddenly see it everywhere. Terry Mullen coined the Baader-Meinhof name in a newspaper forum in 1994 after hearing about an obscure German militant group twice in one day. Later, a Stanford linguist officially named it the frequency illusion. Here's how it actually works. Your brain deals with massive amounts of sensory data all day long. To handle the load, it filters most things out. But when you learn a new word or buy a new car, your brain tags that item as important. Selective attention makes you unconsciously look out for it. Then, confirmation bias steps in to convince you it is appearing more often than before. The visible effect is that a once invisible car model is suddenly parked on every single street corner. This still matters today because it proves our brains are active editors of reality, constantly shaping what we notice based on what we currently care about. Decoy effect. The decoy effect is a psychological pricing trap used by businesses to steer your choices. First identified by consumer researchers in 1982, it happens when a company introduces a third, strategically useless option alongside two actual choices. Imagine you are at the movie theater buying popcorn. You see a small size for $4 and a large for $8. $8 feels steep, so you might just buy the small. But then you notice a medium size priced at $7.50. The medium is the decoy. Nobody wants to pay almost $8 for a medium when they can get the massive bucket for just 50 cents more. The mere presence of this bad deal suddenly makes the expensive large option look like a huge bargain. Instead of debating if you even need that much popcorn, your brain just focuses on winning the best value. This invisible nudge is still used everywhere from coffee shop menus to digital subscriptions, proving our wallets are easily manipulated by a simple trick. Ostrich effect. This is a cognitive bias where you actively avoid information you think will be negative. The term comes from finance. Back in 2006, researchers Dan Galai and Orly Sadeh noticed that investors checked their financial portfolios less often when the stock market was doing poorly. They named it after the old myth that ostriches bury their heads in the sand to hide from danger. Here is how the process works. You suspect something is wrong, like you spent too much money over the weekend or a weird pain in your knee will not go away. Instead of looking at your bank app or calling a doctor, you just look the other way. You tell yourself you will deal with it later. The immediate result is temporary emotional relief. You do not have to feel the stress right now. The visible effect is a pile of unopened bills on the kitchen counter or unread emails sitting in your inbox. This still matters because ignoring a problem almost always makes it much worse and harder to fix. Pratfall effect. It is a psychological quirk where highly capable people actually become more likable when they make a clumsy mistake. In 1966, psychologist Elliot Aronson tested this by having students listen to audio recordings of people answering tough trivia questions. One person nailed almost every question, proving they were super smart. But then, this smart person accidentally spilled a cup of coffee all over themselves. You might think the coffee spill would make them look foolish. Instead, the exact opposite happened. The listeners rated the coffee-spilling genius as much more likable and attractive than the genius who never made a mistake. The blunder knocked the perfect person off a pedestal and made them seem human. Today, this reminds us that striving for absolute perfection can actually push people away. Showing a little vulnerability and making a harmless mistake proves you are real, making it much easier for others to connect with you. Pygmalion effect. This is a psychological quirk where the expectations placed upon you actually dictate how well you perform. The concept was famously proven in a 1968 study by researchers Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson. They gave a fake intelligence test to elementary school students and then told the teachers that a few randomly selected kids were about to experience a massive intellectual growth spurt. Because the teachers believed these specific students had high potential, they subconsciously changed their behavior. They gave these kids warmer smiles, more time to answer questions, and better, more detailed feedback. The visible effect was startling. By the end of the year, the randomly chosen students actually scored significantly higher on real IQ tests than their peers. The high expectations practically willed their intelligence into existence. Today, this matters in classrooms, offices, and even at home. It proves that other people's beliefs about your potential can literally shape your reality, making their expectations a self-fulfilling prophecy. Survivorship bias. It is a logical error where you only look at the things that make it past a certain obstacle and completely ignore the ones that do not. During World War II, the American military wanted to put extra armor on their bomber planes. They looked at the planes returning from missions and saw bullet holes covering the wings and the tail. It seemed obvious to put armor exactly where the damage was. But a statistician named Abraham Wald realized they were making a huge mistake. The military was only looking at the planes that survived the trip. The planes that got shot in the engines never came back. Because the failures are hidden from view, you end up with a backward view of success. You see this when people copy the habits of billionaires. They think waking up at 4 in the morning guarantees wealth, ignoring the thousands of broke people who did the exact same thing. It still matters today because it reminds us that to truly understand success, you have to study the failures.